Welcome back to Sweet Life TV. As promised, today's episode is going to be part 2 of Planning and Budgeting Hell and how to get out of it with Jerry Lynn and Matthew J. For those of you who haven't seen episode 1 yet, I definitely recommend you check it out before or after. I'm back here with John Serino, my co-host, who was at Boomi World this week. He just flew back in last night. John, how was Boomi World?
Boomi was great. So for those of you who don't know, Boomi is a technology that connects other technologies. And as a result, I got to speak with a lot of great companies, a lot of great people doing super interesting stuff. I also got to speak with people from Boomi themselves, and I caught up with some folks from NetSuite. So I have a lot of interesting conversations for the next episode of Sweet Life TV.
You guys are going to get full access to that great content in an upcoming episode that's going to look at Boomi and give you guys the insider perspective of the event. It's an annual event that reunites over 5,000 people from all across different industries and all across different technologies.
That's coming up, but for now, let's jump back into conversation with Jerry Lynn and Matthew J.
Yeah.
Welcome to Sweet Life TV, your one-stop tech talk where we discover the best business tools with the experts behind them. Filmed live on set at Guru's headquarters in Montreal. Guru Solutions is North America's largest Oracle NetSuite ERP services provider. Visit their website at gurusolutions.com with your hosts Ethan Bozoglu and John Serino.
So we're talking a lot about, older systems like spreadsheets and how much risk there is in using them, right? How they can easily break or how your data can get mixed up. There are a lot of companies that are either preparing to launch an IPO or might already be public, and they have to report to their investors every quarter. Now, I can't imagine them using a system with such a high risk for their planning and budgeting. So at what point does it become, not just a what-if scenario, but we have to upgrade to better technology? At what point does it become totally necessary to upgrade to a system like NetSuite Planning and Budgeting?
I think I mentioned before, once a budget is reported to external stakeholder, you're pretty much locked in to explaining if there's anything that's hugely or wildly different than what you've presented. I agree with you. I think if it's a company that's either publicly traded or about to become publicly traded, the consequences of finding errors.
You don't want that margin of error there.
You just cannot afford. And it's even, I would suggest, even privately held companies that have institutional investors. Your credibility is at stake. We've got a lot in the marketplace of highly funded companies that are required to report to multiple investors. Your credibility is on the line as a management team. You do not want to have that called into question as a result of a spreadsheet error.
Maybe I could pass it on to you, Matthew J. Having worked with many companies at the point where they decide to upgrade their systems, what is the final straw? What is the last straw that a company has to have before they say, okay, we've put it off for so long, but we have to make a change right now?
Right. So I think a lot of it is when they start scaling up and getting bigger as a company and they realize that, oh my God, this is it. We have to start doing a better job planning and budgeting. And I think one of the big things we talked about is they're about to go maybe pre-IPO or they're about to go public or they start wanting to go and find investors. This already might be a élément déclencheur, you would say in French, a trigger that would maybe make them aware and oh my goodness, we got to maybe start finding a tool that will better match our needs so that we can be more consistent and avoid errors like spreadsheet errors and be more consistent in what we produce.
And I can imagine it's a big deal for a lot of industries that are highly scrutinized, right? Anything in biotech, clinical trials, even, emerging now, the cannabis industry, right? Their numbers are highly scrutinized, and they have to deliver really strong data every single quarter. It's a super competitive market. So I imagine at that point, a system like that is totally necessary.
Definitely, because now these systems, they have the ability to track comments related to specific numbers and things like that, which are totally cool, and you're able to just go and click it and see, oh, goodness me, somebody had put comments about this, and those are the reasons why it's so high.
Yeah. How do tools like NSPB facilitate minimizing errors and consolidating information?
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of tools that exist out of the box with these softwares. You have the security part. I'm not going to touch on that part again. We've kind of gone over it earlier. But there are tools that allow for the administrator to then go and provide roles to people depending on what they do on their day-to-day basis. So that's a big part, and it's a part that's always a work in progress too. In terms of consolidating information, well, that really refers to making sure that the integrations pull in the right numbers and making sure that the numbers go into the right fields, the right areas, so that they can consolidate appropriately when you need to look at that information from a higher level. And I don't want people to feel as though that the software that NSPB is a software that's only for larger customers, but it is possible to use for smaller ones too. And there are NetSuite built Suite Success modules that really help kickstart an implementation process. So this wouldn't limit people that are maybe smaller companies. They also have the capabilities of being able to implement such a software and be able to be up at a certain time. So I don't want us to feel as though like, oh, only big companies will use this. This is too complicated, because smaller companies, there's definitely a target market for this software as well in that sense.
Yeah, I think I'm an early adopter of technology as well. And so that means that I'm sometimes, stressed dealing with beta versions of software. But that's not the case with a company like Oracle NetSuite, where everything is tried and tested before it goes to market. And yeah, I agree. I think it's great for companies, regardless of whatever size, to get in the game early. It just helps you grow, right? It's one less thing to worry about when you're at that growth stage.
Absolutely. The earlier the better, because you can scale without having to stop the process in order to be able to change the tire on the moving car.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
So, guys, systems aside, I know we've been talking a lot about contingency plans and, some of the struggles that you have in planning and budgeting with spreadsheets and Excel, right? But how do you become more accurate in planning and budgeting? Jerry-Lynn, what are some basic tips and tricks that other CFOs and maybe accountants can make use of in their careers?
So one of the things we've done on an annual basis is, as we go, as things happen, we have a collaborative place where we put all of the information that we want to remember for the next year. It's not sophisticated. It's manageable because of the size of our company. But it allows us, as an aide-memoire, when we're starting the current process, to go back and see where are the flaws from the prior year. What did we forget? And of course, we're all in a changing environment, so there's always quite a long list of things that we need to remember from the one year to the next. And I'm sure tools could probably handle that a bit better than our...
For sure, and I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I've mentioned it before about getting reliable data. It's never good to be forecasting and planning your next year's budget on information that wasn't right, correct? So it's like buying a house, and if you're buying a house on information that wasn't right or information that you didn't get, you would hope to probably know these things in advance. So this is really where integrations with other softwares come into play, and NSPB provides you with those tools to be able to make sure that your integrations are robust and that things flow in correctly at the timings that you want. So it's really flexible, and it gives the user, the admins, the exec teams really the freedom to select and say what they want.
Yeah, and also like just the time factor. I've heard some crazy things, and Jerry-Lynn, maybe you can chime in here. Like, I've heard some things from our customers, people I've spoken to after implementation, who will say, this task used to take 5 weeks and we did it in 3 days after going live with our implementation. That is some serious inflation in your productivity. What would you say? Like a tool like, is that like fair? I mean, that's off the top of my head, but I had heard things like that. Would you say that that's true to your experience, Jerry-Lynn, that the right tool can expedite our processes that much?
I haven't actually done a accumulation of time in a sort of a more a less collaborative environment with the tool, that is. But that doesn't surprise me. The numbers that you've been told by your customers. I should think that if I was to add it up, when you take about 5 executives' time times, it's probably at least a week, if not longer, and then that's not counting the people who are supporting them. It would be amazing to have something where we're all looking at it together, because we would eliminate that back and forth where now you have to redo something because somebody else has changed something, so, and it has an effect on what you're doing. So that is all completely eliminated in the context where you have something where you're all working on it together.
Yeah, so I guess it would be fair to say that it's not just changing your processes or the technicalities, it's also impacting your company culture.
That's a good question. I would say it becomes less a finance-driven exercise and probably more of what it should be, which is a collaborative exercise. The budget process itself is just a reflection of what the strategic plan is for that year. So I think that there's probably a lot more engagement in that process as opposed to I have to do this and then deliver it to finance.
Right, and it probably, I think the secret of it, of why it's so useful and has been so successful, is that it takes big companies back. It enables big companies to function the way, you know, startups do at the very beginning, when you're 3 people working out of your garage and you don't have to go through all of this red tape and all of these processes, and you can sit down at a table and spend some time collaborating on things like that.
Absolutely.
What are some tips and tricks in knowing that you're having the right conversation with your team? Because I imagine you sit down in different departments, and especially at a larger company, how do you really plan and gauge expectations for different people who all want different things for the next year? At what point does expectation or aspiration meet the reality of company objectives or company goals?
Well, if things are being done in the right order, and I can tell you they're not always being done in the right order, they start off with good intentions, but it starts with the CEO and by extension the executive team. If everybody has bought in and engaged in that process and planning process, I should say, from there, every one of the department heads should be able to take it to their teams and plan accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean that once we come back to the table that you add it all together, and of course I mentioned before there's contingencies that oftentimes people put into their budgets. So they wind up sometimes inflating things or putting in a placeholder where something isn't defined. That's when you kind of have to hammer it out. And that's part of that back and forth. Oftentimes you can eliminate that need to be able to plan or to have to plan and set a date and do it on a collaborative tool instead. That's what we've found at Gurus. I mentioned earlier that we do this collaborative tool. It's rudimentary at best, but it allows us to at least communicate changes.
I think a really interesting question would be, you know, you've worked with a lot of companies, small and large. In fact, you've worked with a lot of startups in your background. I'd love to understand what, you know, the evolutionary process of an executive team from a startup to a larger company like K-Staple, for example, would be. What are the key differences in how they collaborate and how they execute different objectives?
I mean, the level of complexity of a larger company is infinite because in a smaller company, you're sitting around a table.
Yeah.
Oftentimes each person has their laptop open and then you're just, you know, you're doing it basically real time. So that's one example.
I imagine that's hard to do at a much larger company, especially with your investors.
I worked at larger public companies where I was responsible for putting together a budget for my particular area. And it is, as you had mentioned earlier, in a silo. People do it in silos. I have no idea what other people are doing in other departments. So how it affects me, wouldn't know. So I think there's a missing link there, and that's true from every level of the organization. It has to be coordinated very tightly when you have a much larger company. The planning has to be there. There's no room for slippage. You have to make sure that you respect the planning dates of your budget in order to be able to meet the deadlines.
And going back to the point of where a company has to upgrade their technologies, I imagine at that point it wouldn't be what if. That would be we really need a powerful system to be able to manage that kind of scrutiny and detail among that many people, right?
Well, there is certainly there's coordination and there's productivity. The productivity formula where you're reducing an incredible amount of man hours in order to be able to collaborate with others. So it's both a communication tool as well as an efficiency tool.
And you talked a little bit about something that was really interesting, and you talked about different, what I would call top-down approach and bottom-up approach, right? So in corporations, it seems like it's a top-down approach where it's executives that are going to be giving the departments a certain amount of allocations maybe, and then they all focus in their own little departments, whereas a bottom-up approach sometimes will allow people on the bottom, so like maybe the managers, to be able to put their numbers in, and then the executive team will be able to kind of make those decisions. And I think the softwares in the market, especially NetSuite, obviously, planning budgeting, is able to do those kinds of things.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation, and I know you're both very busy.
It is planning and budgeting season.
It is.
Yeah.
Got to get back to the budget.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you both again for taking the time to come and speak with us. I hope our viewers have enjoyed this conversation. I know I have. And hope you can all join us for the next slice of life.
Yeah, thank you very much for sitting in with us, guys. Great conversation. I'd also like to add that we'll include a link for a demo of NetSuite Planning and Budgeting for those of you that are interested after hearing this conversation. If you want to check it out, quick 2-3 minute video. We'll also be including links to our website, and we'd love if you leave us a comment below just to let us know what you think of the episode, what topics you'd love to see us cover in the future.
And if you want more insights from Matthew J. or Jerry Lynn, do contact us. You go through our website, and you can get it from the experts.
Thank you for joining. Stay tuned for the next episode.